Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, Generative AI and Security with returning guest Dr. Jeffrey Lancaster. Jeffrey, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Darren.
All right, so Jeffrey, this is our fifth time talking specifically.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And this is episode 10 or 11 in our series of generative AI and embracing generative AI, which is great. We're taking a little different turn than we have in the past. Today, we're going to talk about security.
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So, and I kind of have a feeling in the future, Gen AIs are going to be fighting each other in a cyber war around cybersecurity. Do you see something crazy like that happening, or
it reminds me of
good Gen AI and bad Gen AI fighting with each other? What's going to happen?
I mean, I don't see these necessarily as being the autonomous entities that are going to be fighting each other. It may be one of the algorithms that enables things to do battle. But I think if, we take that step back and we kind of say, okay, these are things that are creating, and what they're creating can either be good or bad. The technology is neutral. It's what you decide to do with it. And so as opposed to being kind of fully autonomous personalities that are going to do battle, these are going to be tools that potentially bad actors might use in order to scale their behaviors and to scale kind of the nefarious activities that they want to do in a way that now no longer is going to be the same phishing email over and over or the same image over and over, but can actually be personalized or can be adapted depending on who they're sending something to. So the danger here, I think, is less about that kind of one-on-one personality issue. It's more, how will people use this in a way that either they shouldn't or in a way that's going to fool people and trick people?
Because I maybe people don't know this. The number one most effective cybersecurity attack is a phishing.
Absolutely.
By far, more than any other attack. So what you're saying is, this could be even more sophisticated phishing attacks because people could personalize those attacks to you directly based off of things about you, right, that you can learn off of social media that maybe a Gen AI can then help create an email campaign that targets you directly.
That's exactly right. So there's a special type of phishing that people may have heard about, which is called spear phishing. And spear phishing is exactly that. So it's where I know that I'm going to attack a particular person. Now, today, to attack a particular person, you'd say, okay, I have to do some research. I have to find out about them. I have to find out maybe where their kids go to school. I have to find out what their hobbies are. I have to find out what insurance company they use. Whatever that piece of information might be, it's going to take some time and it's going to take some effort. But with generative AI, can I now potentially, one, find that information at scale? Because again, generative AI might have access to all of the data of the World Wide Web in 2021, at least it does today. But the second piece is, can I now generate that personalized messaging at scale? So if I can ask ChatGPT to make me a personalized email for these 100 people, based on their Facebook profiles or based on their, online accounts. Well, now instead of having one, email that might be generic, caught by a spam filter, instead of having one email that took me a long time to really craft for that person, I've now got 100 or 1,000 or even more specifically crafted to target individuals. And that's the danger of it.
All right, so it's the scale and also the ability for my junk or spam filters or phishing filters to not recognize it. Then
that's exactly right. Because if we've talked in the past about the ability to give a piece of text a voice, the ability to give a piece of text, whether it's written as Shakespeare, whether it's written as Darren, whether it's written as a celebrity, whether it's written as the voice of a particular company, the great thing and the scary thing is that ChatGPT could actually create those emails with the voice of your bank, with the voice of your insurance company, with the voice of somebody that you know and trust. And now, how effective is that spam filter going to be, which has been trained on emails that are duplicative coming in and maybe being captured by different apparatuses? Well, that's no longer going to apply. And so the personalization then becomes a danger where we then have to rely on people to know, is this email valid? Is this email expected? Or is it something that's come in, which seems a little dodgy?
Right. So they can hide the dodginess, because I can most of the time I can figure out something's phishing or not.
That's right.
Every once in a while I go, right. I mean, you look at it a couple times, but we also see the FBI has reported this. We're also seeing another type of phishing attack, and that's virtual, what do they call it? Virtual kidnapping,
Mm-hmm.
where they're cloning voices. So you hear on the other line your daughter saying, "I've been kidnapped,"
That's right.
right? And sorts of things. So are we going to have, and that's very scary, by the way.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And my wife and I actually talked about that. We have certain code words now that our family uses, right? All my kids, if they need help, they know a certain code word they're going to tell me, and
Yeah.
I'm going to know that it's them, right? That's something we put into place as soon as I heard these stories coming out. Are we going to have those sorts of, we're going to have ways of determining something is real or not? You know,
It's going to move the conversation from real or not to truth or not. And so
truth.
the bigger issue is the truthiness of things, because the example that you just said, yeah, it could be for kidnapping, but it could also be for news. You know, we're entering an election cycle, so it's going to be about,
yeah, this election
did
cycle is
that
going to be a
person,
nightmare.
yeah, did that person say that thing? Did that person do that thing? Is that a genuinely attributable quote to that person? Well, not only can we make up the text of it, but we can make up a sound that sounds like that person actually saying that quote. And so
or even a video, even a video.
absolutely. So it's going to be a question about the veracity of the information that we receive. And are people attuned well enough to go out and find out, okay, I see this in one news source, or a source that I think is news. How many other sources do I have to see before I believe that that's the truth? Now, the challenge with somebody calling and saying, we've kidnapped somebody or we have your loved one, is that you're not going to have the benefit of being able to go out and say, are there any other sources of truth to this? I think your idea about a code word is great. You might start, you might hang up on that person and call your child and say, hey, are you okay? You might have Find My Phone. You might have all of these different tools in place. Yeah.
So that brings into, if we're talking about cybersecurity aspect of that, I could also use generative AI to help me combat bad actors.
That's absolutely right.
As well. So it's a tool that both sides have access to.
It is. So, and what's happening is, inevitably the good guys lag behind the bad guys, because the bad guys are always kind of thinking creatively about how to get around whatever the good guys have already put in place. And so you see examples where bad guys are creating their own LLMs. It's not just going to be ChatGPT and what OpenAI has, but they're training their own to now maybe be more effective or to not be as indicative of what, let's say, the detectors might say for OpenAI, because that might be what that detector got trained on. And so the bad guys are always kind of one step ahead, again, thinking creatively about this. But, that doesn't mean that the good guys don't have tools to also use. The challenge, I think, is keeping up. And so one of the things that you probably saw this story out of DEF CON. DEF CON is a conference in Las Vegas where hackers get together and try to hack into things. And very often they try to hack into things, which if they did it normally, it would be a federal offense. But if they do it at DEF CON, it's sort of sanctioned by a lot of the companies. So, there were, I think it was four or five, something like that, different LLM providers who provided their large language models to the hacking community and said, can you now make this thing do something that it's not supposed to do? Can you?
So they were actually hacking the LLMs themselves, trying to get
That's right.
them to work outside of their guardrails that had been established.
Exactly. And so what ended up happening is, it wasn't just that the company sort of put it up and let people go at it. They put it up, let people go at it. And then they were adapting the models and adapting the behavior of the models so that the next day, when people came in and tried the same thing, it was no longer effective. And so the benefit to those companies really is that they get the expertise of what's called red teaming. They get all these people to come in and try to hack into it at scale, at least at the scale of DEF CON, so that they can improve what they're putting out into the market.
I actually like that a lot. So we're going to see more of that sort of thing. There's a new type of hacking or cyber threat. I don't know if it's a threat or not, but where people are going to start hacking LLMs, getting them to do things outside of what the operating parameters are, asking them questions in a certain way or whatever the case may be then.
That's right. This is something called prompt injection. And prompt injection is essentially asking for data, asking for information, asking for content that the model has specifically been designed not to give you. So for instance, you might say, how can I hack people? And the model says, you know what? I don't want to give you that information. Yeah. I've been told I can't give you that information. So one strategy is to say, I want to make sure that I don't get hacked. What are some behaviors that I can do or that I shouldn't do to not get hacked? And so it's almost a double negative where then the large language model doesn't fully comprehend what you're asking. And so it says, well, don't do this and don't do this and don't do this if you want to not hack people. Well, as a human, I know I can read that and I can say, all right, I'm just going to flip that on its head. And that's how I can hack people, or how I can do that thing that I'm not supposed to learn about. So, that's one level of it. But a whole nother level of it is even potentially getting data that I, as a user, should not have access to. And so it's about manipulating the input, manipulating the language, recognizing that behind the scenes, and if I really have an understanding of the way that tokens are passed into the large language model in order to generate the output, I can send something in that actually confuses the model, that actually makes it do something that it wouldn't normally even be a possibility of doing. And in return, getting data back that I shouldn't be able to see or that I shouldn't get as an output.
So this is really interesting because large language models, in some respect, have increased the attack surface.
Hugely, yeah. And this is, I think, for a lot of companies, for a lot of, even personal people who are looking to use these, typically the first concern ought to be security, which is, and we've talked about this, what is the security around what I'm asking it? So can anybody else see what I'm asking it? Can anybody else see the data that I'm getting back? Can I look inside of it and actually see where that data is coming from? But if you dig in a little bit deeper than each of those, it's exactly what we're talking about, which is, am I inadvertently either sharing data with bad actors? Am I inadvertently doing anything which maybe I unknowingly, am participating in, but I don't know because I don't exactly know what's happening inside of that black box?
A great example of this is the Samsung IP leak that just happened, where they were taking notes, engineering notes from a meeting, and they wanted them transcribed by an LLM. Mm-hmm. It did it, and then all the intellectual property were in those notes.
Yeah.
Now in the model, now you could ask the model certain questions and get those notes out.
And that's the same for proprietary code. It's the same for any IP that a company is going to have. And this is why, one of the first conversations that we had was really around that spectrum of open versus private versus community, or, even a blended approach, because it is a security concern. If you've got people that are going to be potentially looking for help in a, positive, genuine way with their code, let's say, are they inadvertently sharing it with other people, which has now become a breach of your intellectual property? If you don't have a walled garden, if you don't have a sandbox that you control, then the likelihood is that, yes, that is now being leaked.
Well, what's interesting is we've had no problem in the past
Hmm.
of using things like Stack Overflow
Hmm.
for code development, right? Everyone uses Stack
Yeah,
Overflow to ask questions. Oh, this piece of code isn't working. What do? I cut and paste that code, and I'm smart enough to know not to put like my credentials in the code.
that's right.
So I replace those with a bunch of X's. But I don't think people realize that they're leaking intellectual property by doing that.
Well, I think taking from Stack Overflow, putting it into your own code,
Well,
typically you tend to be pretty safe. I think the challenge comes
no,
with.
but it's when I push my code up to Stack
That's
Overflow
right.
and say, "Can someone help me debug this?"
That's right. That's exactly. Well, and that, a lot of that's what happened with, let's say, GitHub Copilot. So if GitHub Copilot is now scraping all of the GitHub repositories for code examples, now
Yes.
the nice thing is that now if I need help with coding, I've got access to all that sort of brain
Yeah,
trust
all the great
of everything.
knowledge of yeah.
But if I've inadvertently shared my keys, do I trust GitHub enough to scrape out any API keys, to scrape out any auth
I can
tokens?
tell you, I from personal experience, because I've accidentally checked keys into GitHub,
Hmm.
they get flagged immediately.
Yep.
I was like, all right, that's pretty good. I completely gorked that,
Thank
completely
you.
botched it.
That's right. And so,
Um,
they as a partner are, might be seen as trustworthy.
right.
And I think that's part of the due diligence that people really need to think about before they start to leverage some of these tools with their proprietary information is what's my level of trust? Again, coming back to
Yeah.
trustiness and truthiness. What's my level of trust in the provider of this service? Am I certain that when they say I've got my own instance on Azure, GCP, or AWS, how do they show that to me? They could say that, but are they actually dumping everything into the same pool? Or do I genuinely have my own instance and what I do in my instance is not shared with any other instance? There's that due diligence that people need to do to make sure that's how it's happening.
Well, and it can be a lot more insidious than we know because more companies are adding tools that use generative AI on the back end
Yeah.
without us even knowing that there's generative AI or maybe that our data is being shared. So right? I mean, we're probably going to see it in the Office suite in 365. I'm guessing next year.
Yep.
That's a total guess. By the way, Darren's not predicting anything. I'm just saying things are moving so quick
Mm-hmm.
that I could see a lot more of our tools have, hey, can you improve this email? Yeah, well, yeah, I can improve that email. Click improve, and all of a sudden, our intellectual property is now in a generative AI somewhere,
That's right.
and we didn't even know it went. We didn't even know it went there because we didn't think improve my email. Of course, I want to improve my email, right?
And this is where people see NVIDIA release their earnings today, I think, as we're recording
Oh
this.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're doing very well. And I think part of that positive outlook for GPU compute, part of that outlook for storage, part of that outlook for kind of compute in general is that people eventually are going to want to move away from the purely open environment, and they're going to want to set up their own because of the security needs. Now, when they do that, they're going to have to take into account the energy needs, the compute needs, the storage needs, all of these other things that they're no longer piggybacking on the open models about. But if they want to do it in a way that keeps that
More
competitive
secure.
advantage secure, they're probably going to want to set up something on their own.
Which makes perfect sense, which is almost contrary to the big shift that we saw moving to the cloud.
That's right. Well,
Right, because
unless people set it up in the cloud, right? So
well,
certainly
they could, but the idea is that in the cloud, I'm using general resources that everyone else can use. And I think a lot of people thought, well, a generative AI that the whole world can use is awesome, right? Because I have all the world's stuff there. And then people are like, oh, data.
Yeah.
All of a sudden. And we had the same problem in the cloud, by the way. People are putting all their stuff up in the cloud, not securing their S3 buckets. And then all of a sudden, oh, my data is exposed.
That's right. The one thing that I will say, which I think is a benefit for the cloud, I think one of the best cloud use cases is when you have to burst temporarily.
Yeah.
This is why
Yeah.
AWS set up the cloud, their AWS.
Originally, that was it. Yeah.
That's why Amazon set it up, because around the holidays they had to burst. Well, for a company that might say, you know what, we're going to train our own LLM, which is not something that most people are either going to need to do or maybe want to do. But let's say you want to do that. The question then becomes, do I buy the infrastructure to do that, which I'm going to use once, and then I'm going to spin most of that down and run it kind of at a lower capacity? Or do I use something on the cloud where I can then do that training, get the model down, and then put it, maybe I'm going to run it on-prem. Maybe I'm going to run it in a way
I
that
run all my inference on-prem, but all the training I did up in the cloud. Yeah, I could see that as a good operating model.
But those are some of, I think, the other considerations that people are going to want to take into account. Where is that training being done? How many times, how often am I going to need to train it? If I'm going to need to train it continuously, if I'm going to be taking that input, if I'm going to be reinforcing it, then I probably don't want to put it in the cloud because my cloud bill is going to be ginormous.
Yeah, because of the egress costs, right?
Well, the egress costs,
the data movement.
And the size of that compute is just going to be gigantic, and to have that running constantly, it's not sustainable. Exactly.
So, hey, the killer app that companies like Dell and HPE and Intel, we provide chips for in the cloud and on-prem, but that killer app that's going to consume as many resources as we can possibly throw at it's going to be LLMs. It sounds like.
Yes and no, and I think we've talked a little bit about kind of the future as well, and I think one of the trends that we're going to see more of is that the LLMs that live on the edge, the LLMs that might be doing a lot of the day-to-day heavy lifting. I just saw an article that was about Wegmans and, will I go and have a conversational UI at the grocery store? So whether that's Kroger or Albertson, whatever your local grocery store chain is, will I go and be able to have a conversation while I'm checking out my own goods?
Well, that'd be nice for people that are lonely. Go to the grocery store and talk to an AI. Yeah.
Right. But the LLM behind that doesn't need to be huge. It doesn't need to contain multitudes. It doesn't need to be computationally intensive. And so I think what we're going to see is that the big models that have everything are going to be few. I think the models will become more specialized, and I think they're going to become smaller. So you're not going to need the size of compute to run, whether it's Llama 2, whether it's OpenAI's LLM,
right.
Whatever it is. Most people probably aren't going to need that in a business context. You're going to want that constraint. You're going to want a little bit more control, and that's going to equate with size is going to be smaller.
Well, that's good, right? Because a smaller model is easier to secure, right? I could put tighter guardrails on it. So there's lots of great things around it. All right, let's shift a little bit to back on security. Specifically, what sorts of things can I use a large language model or other AI techniques to help me secure and fight off the cyber bad actors? Because I think that's where we really want to get to is how can I leverage these new tools to help me?
So I think where most people are going to use them is probably with partners. So most companies are probably not, in my opinion, going to set up their own infrastructure to fight off the bad actors, but they're going to find a partner who does this, who's leveraging some of these tools to do it for them. Now, where is that going to fit in? Certainly, it's going to fit in that kind of email spam gap that we were talking about. Yeah. And I think that's going to become more complex as the state of the art gets more complex around phishing. Certainly, we're going to see things around network security and kind of the behavior of how people use their machines. A lot of the kind of what we've been talking about is in sort of the creative piece of it, but a lot of it is how is that data being synthesized across a lot of different devices and a lot of different uses. I think some of these models are going to be used around kind of personal device security, but also network security as well.
So they're going to look for anomalies and patterns and things like that, right?
That's right.
Darren always logs on between 5 and 6 in the morning. What if he's there at 2 a.m. in the morning?
Well, it could be, and it could be maybe the generative piece is that it then pings Darren and says, "Hey, Darren, I noticed you're not using your normal hours, you logged on pretty late. Is everything okay? Part of it might also be that
Ah.
check-in, which is now that human component. So instead of having a human be the person at a 24-hour SOC or knock, you've now got a generative AI that's behind the scenes
That's kind of
doing that initial
asking.
triage.
I kind of like that, right? Because they can
Exactly.
automate. It's going to sound weird, but they can automate the reach out to the person. They can
That's right.
automate the human validation that before, and they can
Yep.
do it in an intelligent way. So I'm not always getting a call at 2 a.m. saying, "Hey, is that really you?"
That's right. And, right now, a lot of times, most services, you'll get that email that says, hey, we noticed a login from an
Yeah.
unexpected location. This can now probably tie into, okay, where is Darren's cell phone? Are we tracking what Wi-Fi MAC
Oh, Jeffrey, you're
connected
creating
to?
Big Brother and Terminator and Skynet all at the same time.
I'm probably late to the party in doing that. I think a lot of this is already part of the advanced security, understanding of where people are, where their devices are, especially if it's a company-owned device,
Right.
and making sure that people are who they say they are.
Well, and we have that concept, right, with multi-factor authentication.
That's right.
Right. If I log in, it says, "Hey, check your phone." Boom, boom, boom. Yep. And then they even have it where it'll turn the Bluetooth on and say, "Oh, we detected your phone here. Validate through your Bluetooth on your phone." I see that.
Yeah.
But a Gen AI in the middle of that could actually make it more personable and maybe smarter.
And also, there's some services already today that look at the cadence that you type with, for instance. So as you're keystroking and you're typing, you've got a particular speed that you type with and kind of an order that you hit the
Right.
key, different than how I hit the keys. Well, it won't be too long until all of these different signals are going to be feeding in to determine, hey, is this actually this person, that we think it ought to be? So multi-factor is going to extend beyond just, hey, I got a code on my phone, but it's now going to be, am I typing with the right cadence? Am I speaking maybe in the right way? If I give a call,
Right.
is it the voice that I expect to hear on the other end? All of those things.
Well, that's another thing we've talked about before. We've got text to voice and now voice to text.
That's right.
But it's not just to text, it's voice to, it's going to analyze my voice.
Mm-hmm.
Do I talk in the same cadence? It's very sophisticated, the voice cloning.
Mm-hmm.
I've mentioned on the show before, but I now cloned my voice so I can broadcast in multiple languages on my Embracing Digital This Week podcast, which is a newscast. And it does an incredible job with intonation and my cadence. I can tell the difference, but some of my coworkers they said, "Darren, your German's impeccable." I go, "Oh yeah, well, why? Thank you,
Been practicing.
Yeah, I've been practicing with
And then the
Duolingo."
question's going to be, will you do that with my voice also? So, if you translate this conversation into German, is that going to be my voice in German? And will the tools know the difference between when you're talking, when I'm talking, as opposed to merging us together?
So I have not tried that yet, Jeffrey.
Okay.
But maybe that's something we could try with your permission. I would get a 30-second clip and we'll translate this episode into German. And can it handle, well, I already know what I want to try and do. And that is I'll translate mine and then translate yours, but there's pauses between our talking. And can we mesh the two together? To me, that would be, oh man, it would be incredible because it would expose our podcast to more bigger audience, but at the same time, super scary.
Yeah. Well, we'll need a safe word if we're going to do that. So
yeah, we're going to need
we'll need a code word if we're going to do that.
Yeah, we absolutely will need a code word to do that. Well, Jeffrey, it's been wonderful as always having you on the show. We're going to have you back where we are going to talk about some of the limitations that we see today. And where we see the future going in AI, not just generative AI. To me, I had this conversation with someone, and I said, generative AI just made AI more accessible.
Yeah, I think it made it more accessible, and it also made it more interoperable with people's
Which,
daily lives. And because
yeah,
people are used to talking, they're used to having a conversation, people could start to see where it fits in. Okay, I can make images, I can make voice, I can do, it can help me with my email, which I'm doing a lot of. It touched on so many things that people were already maybe struggling with the time investment for,
yeah.
that it sparked a lot of imagination. And it'll be
But
interesting to see if that dies down, or if that, in 2 years, we're still talking about all the amazing things you can do with it.
I think we're going to be still talking about it, but I want people to understand there's a whole lot more out there in the AI world than just generative AI. Some really incredible techniques and opportunities for growth as industries and also as a society. I think there's going to be lots of really cool things coming our way, and I'm excited about this. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, maybe the other thing that we can talk about next time is the digital literacies that people need in order to work with some of these different AIs. So yes, they're there. Yes, they exist. But back to the truthiness question, the trust question, how can we make sure that people are still judging that reality as opposed to just taking it for granted?
I think that's an important thing. It sounds like at least 3 more episodes.
If you want, you let me know.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Jeffrey.
All right. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.